The Book of Lambspring Remixed. Author's Preface. I've always been drawn to the borderlands, the places where philosophy turns poetic and science begins to sound like prayer. Alchemy lives in that liminal space. It was never only about furnaces and metals, but about consciousness itself, how it fractures, matures, and reunites. When I discovered the Book of Lambspring, I felt as though I had stumbled upon a mirror from another century. Its 15 emblems spoke in riddles, but behind each one pulsed something startlingly human. The alchemist's fire, the black beast, the two fishes swimming in the sea, all of it read like a coded story of the psyche struggling toward wholeness. I began reading not as a historian, but as a practitioner of what I call narrative alchemy, the art of transforming the raw material of experience through story and symbol. I wanted to see how these old images could still act as spiritual technologies, how they might guide modern seekers through the same inner laboratory where the medieval philosophers once worked. So this isn't a translation or commentary in the traditional sense. It's a correspondence across time. My goal is to reanimate these emblems, to show how they still speak to the creative, divided, yearning human being of today. Each section is both an interpretation and an invitation, a chance to look into the mirror of Lambspring and glimpse your own reflection moving beneath the surface. If these words feel less like explanation and more like initiation, that's intentional. Alchemy was always an experiential art. You don't just read it, you let it work on you. I offer this work, then, as a modern alchemist's field journal, a way to listen to the ancient voice still echoing through our inner sea. Every alchemist began with a vessel, a fire, and a mystery. The vessel was the body, the fire was attention. The mystery was whatever stirred restlessly in the dark, asking to be transformed. To read the Book of Lambspring in this way is to step into that same experiment. It asks nothing more of you than to listen, to let the old symbols move through your imagination as if they were dreams sent to remind you of something you already know. So before you begin, take a breath. Feel the quiet tide of your own inner sea. Now let us open the first emblem and wade into the waters where the two fishes swim. 1. The Sea of Forgetting. The seeker had no name, or had forgotten it so long ago that the forgetting itself had become a kind of name. They woke each morning with the taste of salt on their tongue and a weight in their chest, as if they'd swallowed the ocean in their sleep. Sometimes in the space between dreaming and waking, they felt it, a vast sea moving beneath their ribs. It glowed faintly, like bioluminescence in deep water, but the light was dim, obscured by silt and shadow. The sea breathed with them, or perhaps they breathed with it. But the rhythm was all wrong, stuttering and strained, like trying to dance to music they could no longer hear. The seekers spent their days at the shore of this inner sea, hands busy with the futile work of control. They built dams of thought to hold back the tide of feeling. They dredged the shallows for meaning, sifting through sand and broken shells. They charted the currents with elaborate maps, trying to predict when the waters would rise and fall, never quite managing it, never quite understanding why. The sea was too much and not enough. Some days it threatened to drown them. Other days it receded so far they feared it had dried up entirely, leaving only cracked earth in the memory of moisture. They did not know, had never known, that the sea was their own life force, the source and sum of everything they were. They thought it was something to be managed, mastered, controlled. At night the dreams came. In the dreams they stood waist-deep in luminous water that stretched to every horizon. The sky above was the same color as the sea below, so there was no way to tell which was which, no way to orient themselves. They were always alone in these dreams, or thought they were, until the night the voice came. It might have been the wind moving across the water. It might have been an old teacher they'd once known, someone whose face they could no longer quite remember. Or it might have been the sea itself, finally speaking after years of silence. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It sounded like waves against stone, like breath through reed, like the whisper of fins cutting through dark water. Two fishes swim in your sea, it said, yet you know neither. The seeker turned in circles, searching for the speaker, but saw only endless water and the strange doubled sky. Two fishes, the voice repeated, softer now, almost sad. But look closer. They cast only one shadow. The seeker looked down into the water at their feet. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, they saw it. Two shapes moving in the depths, circling each. Other in an ancient pattern. One bright as quicksilver, darting upward. One dark as lunar pearl, spiraling down. And beneath them both, impossibly, a single shadow. Then the dream dissolved, as dreams do. And the seeker woke gasping in their small room, the weight in their chest heavier than before, the taste of salt sharp on their lips. But something had shifted. The sea within had been disturbed, and in the depths, unnoticed yet, two fishes began to stir. 2. The meeting of the fishes. For 3 nights after the voice came, the seeker could not dream at all. They lay awake in the dark, feeling the sea churn restlessly beneath their ribs, listening to their own heartbeat like a drum calling something forth from the deep. On the 4th night, exhaustion finally pulled them under. The dream began differently this time. The seeker did not stand at the shore. They were already in the water, suspended in that strange twilight depth where the pressure of the sea becomes indistinguishable from the pressure of one's own thoughts. Above them, the surface glimmered like hammered silver. Below, the darkness went down and down, perhaps forever. They took a breath, though they should not have been able to breathe, and dove. Down they swam through layers of temperature and color. The water grew warmer, then colder, then warm again. It shifted from blue to green to a deep indigo that had no name. Their body felt both heavy and weightless, as if gravity itself could not decide what to do with them here. And then, in the midst of that indigo vastness, they saw the fishes. The first appeared as a streak of light, so sudden and bright that the seeker flinched. It darted upward in a spiral, trailing luminescence like a comet. Its scales caught and threw back the light in silver fragments, restless, electric, alive with an almost frantic energy. It moved as if the water itself were too slow, too thick, as if it longed to burst free into air, into fire, into something faster than flesh. When it circled back and hung suspended before the seeker, its voice was quick, urgent, thrumming with intensity. "I am spirit," it said. "I am the ascending flame, the breath that rises, the thought that pierces heaven. Follow me upward, where clarity lives, where light never dims, where you can finally see everything from above and understand." The seeker felt the pull of it immediately, that familiar hunger for transcendence, for escape from the messy weight of the body, for the clean, bright realm of pure idea. Spirit's voice resonated in their skull, between their eyes, in the hollow of their throat where words waited to be spoken. Before they could answer, the second fish emerged from the depths below. It rose slowly, almost languidly, as if it had all the time in the world and knew it. Its scales held a different light, softer, lunar, opalescent. It glowed from within, the way certain deep-sea creatures glow, with a bioluminescence that seems to come from some ancient, patient source. Where spirit darted and flashed, this fish moved in long, graceful undulations, as if it were dancing to music only it could hear. "I am soul," it said, and its voice was low, resonant, moving through the seeker's chest like the rumble of distant thunder through stone. "I am the descending root, the weight that knows the feeling that holds memory. Follow me downward into the fertile dark, where everything is connected, where you can finally feel the whole of things and be held by them." The seeker felt this pull too, the longing to sink into the body's wisdom, to stop the endless chatter of thought, to rest in the wordless knowing that lived in the belly, the bones, the blood. Soul's voice vibrated in their sternum, their solar plexus, deep in the cradle of their hips where the first waters of life had once held them. For a moment the seeker floated between them, equally drawn to both, paralyzed by the impossibility of choosing. Then spirit and soul turned to face each other, and the argument began. "You would drag them into darkness," spirit said, circling faster now, agitated, "into the mud and muck of emotion, the prison of the body, the tomb of forgetting. I offer freedom, thought unbound, consciousness ascending, liberation from the wheel of suffering. You would burn them to ash, Soul replied, its voice still calm, but edged now with something harder. You offer only escape, only denial of half of what they are. I am not prison, but foundation. I am not tomb, but womb. Without me, you are nothing but smoke and mirrors, ideas without ground, light without warmth. Without me, Spirit flashed back, you are nothing but stagnation, weight without purpose, feeling that goes nowhere, the endless repetition of the same old stories. Without me, Soul countered, you are nothing but dissociation, severed from source, homeless, rootless, a ghost pretending to be alive. They swam faster now, circling each other in tighter and tighter spirals. The water between them began to churn, to heat, to crack with something like lightning. The seeker could feel the argument in their own body, the familiar war between head and heart, between doing and being, between the drive to transcend and the need to belong. How many times had they lived this division? How many mornings had they woken with Spirit's voice urging them toward ambition, achievement, the next goal, the higher ground, while Soul whispered from beneath, asking them to slow down, to feel, to remember what mattered beyond the bright tyranny of accomplishment? How many times had they tried to silence one to hear the other more clearly, only to find themselves half alive, half present, moving through the world like a figure cut in two? The seeker reached out, desperate to stop the argument, desperate to catch one fish or the other and end the war by choosing. Their hand closed around quicksilver brightness, and both fishes vanished. The water went still, empty. The seeker's hand closed on nothing. Heart pounding, they reached again, this time diving down toward the lunar glow. And again, both disappeared. The seeker hung suspended in the suddenly quiet water, alone, confused, aching with a strange hollowness in their chest. The loneliness was profound, but so was something else, a tingling along the spine, a subtle electricity, as if their body were trying to tell them something their mind could not yet grasp. In the silence, they heard it again. That voice like wind, like waves, like the sea speaking its own truth. You ask which fish to follow, but they share one heart. The seeker looked down into the water and for just a moment saw what they had seen before. Two shapes circling in the depths, seemingly separate, yet casting only one shadow on the ocean floor. One shadow. The revelation trembled at the edge of understanding, but before it could land, before the seeker could truly see it, the dream began to fade. The water grew thin, the light changed, and the seeker woke in their small room, gasping, their hands still outstretched as if reaching for something that had always been just beyond their grasp. But in their chest, beneath the familiar weight of the sea, something new had kindled, a question that burned like a small, steady flame. What if the answer isn't to choose in our three? The vessel and the fire. The question haunted the seeker through the days that followed. It walked with them through the marketplace, where vendors called out their wares and the smell of bread and honey hung thick in the air. It sat with them at meals, making food taste like ashes. It lay beside them at night, whispering in the dark. What if the answer isn't to choose? But if not to choose, then what? The seeker had lived their whole life in the logic of either/or, either spirit or soul, either thought or feeling, either the transcendent heights or the embodied depths. To suggest there might be another way felt like being asked. To see a color that had no name, to hear a note that existed between all other notes. On the seventh night after the fishes had vanished from their grasp, the seeker returned to the inner sea. This time they did not dive. They simply sat at the shore, feet in the water, and waited. The sea was calm. No fishes appeared. But as the seeker sat in the stillness, watching the way moonlight, or was it starlight, played across the gentle waves, they became aware of something else, a presence. At first they thought it was their own reflection, rippling on the water's surface. But when they looked closer, they saw it was not quite their face looking back. The features were similar but older, much older. The eyes held a depth of knowing that the seeker did not yet possess, but also something familiar, something that felt like coming home. The reflection spoke, and its voice was their own voice, aged like wine, like wood, like stone worn smooth by centuries of water. You have learned the first lesson, it said, that reaching for one makes both disappear. This is good, this is necessary. Who are you? The seeker asked, though some part of them already knew. I am the hermit. I am the elder self. I am who you will become when the work is complete, or perhaps who you have always been, waiting for you to remember. The reflection smiled, and the smile held both sorrow and joy, as if it had seen everything the seeker would have to endure, and knew it was worth it. I am here to show you the way, though the way is nothing I can give you. You must discover it yourself, as all seekers must. The voice said the fishes share one heart, the seeker said. But I don't understand. They seem so different, so opposed. They are opposed, the hermit interrupted gently, as day opposes night, as in-breath opposes out-breath, as tide opposes shore. But opposition is not the same as separation. The sun and moon oppose each other across the sky, yet both are needed for the world to turn. The seeker felt something shift in their chest, a subtle realignment, like tectonic plates settling into new configuration. Then what must I do? The hermit's eyes gleamed with something that might have been mischief, might have been compassion. The fishes must be cooked in their own water. The seeker blinked. I don't. What does that mean? It means, the hermit said, that you cannot separate them to understand them. You cannot pull them out of their element to examine them in the dry light of analysis. They must remain in the sea, their sea, your sea, the same sea, and there they must be transformed by fire. But fire and water are also opposites that need each other, the hermit finished. Water without fire is stagnant, lifeless. Fire without water is destructive, consuming. Together they create the vessel of transformation. The seeker looked down at their hands, uncertain. How do I begin? The hermit was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence the seeker felt the weight of what was being asked. Finally, the reflection spoke again. To create the vessel, you must first make a sacrifice, not of blood or gold or any outward thing, but of something far more precious, a belief you have clung to about who you must be. The seeker's throat tightened. They knew immediately which belief the hermit meant. It was the belief that had shaped their entire life, that they had to become someone other than who they were, someone smarter, stronger, more spiritual, more grounded, more something, that their worth depended on transcending their humanity or finally accepting it, on reaching the summit or touching the depths, on getting it right. It was the belief that they were not enough as they were. The thought of releasing it felt like being asked to step off a cliff. If I let go of that, the seeker whispered, what will be left? Everything, the hermit said simply, let go. And so, sitting there at the shore of the inner sea, the seeker did something they had never done before. They stopped trying to become anything. They stopped reaching for transcendence or grasping for groundedness. They simply released. The belief dissolved like salt in water. And as it dissolved, the sea itself began to change. The boundaries between water and air grew permeable, luminous. The seeker realized they could no longer tell where their body ended, and the sea began. They were the shore, they were the water. The sea was not something they contained. They were something the sea dreamed into being. The sea itself is the vessel, the hermit said, and now the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from inside and outside at once. You are both the work and the worker, the substance and the one who transforms it. There is no separation. There has never been separation. That was the first illusion, and now you have begun to see through it. The seeker looked down and saw that their body had become translucent, like the walls of a glass alembic. Through their own skin, they could see the sea within, could see the two fishes emerging again from the depths, circling, watching, waiting. And the fire, the seeker asked, Where does the fire come from? The hermit smiled again, and this time the smile was fierce, almost wild. From the only place fire ever comes, from what burns you, from grief, from longing, from the honest questions you have been afraid to ask, from every moment you have turned away from your own heart. As the words landed, the seeker felt it, a heat beginning to build in their chest, not the comfortable warmth of contentment, but something hotter, more dangerous. It was the burn of all the years they had spent divided against themselves, the ache of relationships they had held at arm's length because they didn't know how to be both strong and vulnerable, the rage at all the time lost trying to be someone they were not, the desperate, fierce longing to finally come home to themselves. The fire was grief. The fire was love. The fire was the unbearable tenderness of being alive and not knowing how to do it right, and finally admitting that there was no right, only this, the messy, broken, beautiful truth of being human. The heat intensified. The sea within began to warm. How long, the seeker gasped. How long must I tend this fire? Days, the hermit said, and the reflection began to fade, dissolving back into the water from which it had emerged. Maybe lifetimes. The water will darken before it clears. The fishes will dissolve before they reform. You will think you have lost everything, but you must not extinguish the fire. You must not leave the vessel. You must become both the observer and the observed, the one who watches and the one who burns. Will you stay with me? The seeker asked, suddenly afraid. I am always with you, the hermit said, nearly gone now, just a shimmer on the water's surface. I am the part of you that has already made this journey, the part that knows the way through. When you forget, remember, you are not separate from what you seek to transform. Enter the sea completely, become the vessel, let the fire burn. And then the reflection vanished, and the seeker was alone. But not alone. In the depths of the inner sea, the two fishes had returned. They circled each other slowly, warily, like dancers who had once known the steps, but had forgotten the music. The seeker could feel them moving, spirit like quicksilver lightning along the spine, soul like deep tidal pulls in the belly, and for the first time they did not try to choose between them. Instead, the seeker took a breath, deep, full, surrendered, and let themselves sink completely into the water. They did not stand at the shore anymore. They were the sea, and in their chests the fire burned steady and low, patient as stone, ancient as stars. The work had begun. The seeker felt the heat spreading through the water, felt spirit and soul begin to sense it too. The fishes swam closer to each other, not in argument now, but in something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. The water around them began to shimmer and swirl. Days passed, or maybe only hours. Time moved differently here. The seeker watched as spirit and soul circled, clashed, separated, returned. Sometimes they moved in harmony. Sometimes they collided with such force that the water churned, and the seeker's body shook with the impact. But always, always the fire burned beneath, patient and relentless, and the sea held everything, the harmony and the collision, the light and the dark, the rising and the falling, all of it contained in the vessel that was the seeker's own being. Their breath became the rhythm that rocked the vessel. Inhale, spirit rose. Exhale, soul descended. Inhale and exhale, rise and fall, the eternal tide that moved through all things. The seeker began to understand. This was the cooking. This was the coction. Not a single moment of transformation, but a process, a patience, a tending. The work of a lifetime, distilled into this one eternal now. And as they watched, as they breathed, as they held the fire and the water and the two fishes in the vessel of their own awareness, something began to change. The water began to darken. 4. The blackening nigredo. At first, the darkening was subtle, a faint cloudiness at the edges of perception, like ink dropped into clear water. The seeker thought it might pass, might dissipate with the next breath or the next turning of the tide. It did not pass. The darkness spread. It moved through the inner sea like smoke, like silt stirred up from the ocean floor, like blood dissolving into water. The luminous quality of the water, that strange phosphorescence that had always been there, faint but constant, began to dim. The quicksilver flash of spirit grew harder to see. The lunar glow of soul faded into the murk. The seeker tried to keep watching, tried to maintain their observer's calm, but panic began to creep in at the edges. This is part of the process, they told themselves. The hermit said the water would darken. This is expected. This is necessary. But knowing something intellectually and enduring it in the body are two entirely different things. The darkness deepened. Days passed, or was it weeks? Time had become unreliable, slippery. The seeker could no longer tell if they were sleeping or waking, dreaming or awake. The boundaries between states dissolved along with everything else. They moved through their outer life like a ghost, going through the motions of eating and speaking and performing the small tasks that life required. But all of it felt distant, muffled, as if happening to someone else. The real life was happening inside, in the sea that had become a black storm. The water grew thick, viscous, oppressive. It pressed against the seeker's chest with a physical weight that made breathing difficult. At night, or what passed for night in this strange suspended time, they would wake gasping, clawing at their throat, certain they were drowning from the inside out. The fire that had once burned steady in their chests now felt like it was consuming them. The heat had become something cruel, merciless. It burned through every defense, every pretense, every carefully constructed story they had told themselves about who they were. All the old wounds rose to the surface, pulled up from the depths by the relentless churning of the waters. Every failure, every betrayal, every moment of shame and regret. Every time they had chosen spirit over soul or soul over spirit, abandoning half of themselves for the illusion of wholeness. Every relationship that had failed because they could not be both vulnerable and strong, both present and free. Every dream deferred, every truth unspoken, every small death they had died in the name of being acceptable, being safe, being enough. The darkness showed them everything they had tried not to see. And the worst part, the part that made the seeker want to extinguish the fire, abandon the vessel, claw their way back to the surface in the simple, divided life they had known before, was that the fishes were gone. Spirit and soul, who had been so vivid, so present, so real, had vanished into the black water. The seeker called for them, searched for them, dove deep and swam in frantic circles, looking for any trace of silver or pearl, any flash of light in the darkness. Nothing. They were alone in the Black Sea with only the fire that burned and showed no mercy. I have lost everything, the seeker thought, and the thought was not metaphor, but felt truth, carved into bone. I have destroyed the very thing I was trying to save. The grief was enormous, oceanic, a drowning from within. The seeker wept, and their tears became indistinguishable from the salt water of the inner sea. They raged at the hermit for not warning them it would be this bad, at themselves for being foolish enough to begin this work, at the fishes for abandoning them, at God or fate or whatever force had set them on this path in the first place. But the fire burned on, indifferent to rage, indifferent to grief. And slowly, so slowly, the seeker did not notice at first, something began to shift. It happened in a moment of absolute exhaustion. The seeker had been fighting the darkness for what felt like lifetimes, trying to see through it, trying to dispel it, trying to find the fishes and bring them back by sheer force of will. They had been holding themselves rigid, braced against the storm, refusing to let the blackness touch the core of who they were. But you cannot hold yourself rigid forever. Eventually, the body gives out. Eventually, the will breaks. The seeker broke. They stopped fighting. They stopped trying to see through the darkness and simply let themselves be blind. They stopped trying to find the fishes and accepted that they were gone. They stopped trying to control the fire and let it burn where it would. They stopped trying to maintain any sense of who they had been and let that self dissolve into the black water. It was not a heroic surrender. There was nothing noble or spiritual about it. It was simply the surrender of something that has exhausted every other option. the way a body finally gives in to sleep after days of insomnia. Not because sleep is chosen, but because consciousness can no longer be maintained. The seeker let go. They stopped being the observer standing apart from the work, stopped being the alchemist tending the vessel from outside. They simply became the darkness, became the grief, became the storm and the water and the fire and the dissolving self. All of it happening at once with no one standing apart to witness or judge or try to make meaning of it. They sank into the blackness the way a stone sinks into water, with no resistance, no agenda, no hope for what might come after. And in that moment of complete surrender, something extraordinary happened. The storm began to still, not immediately, not all at once, but gradually by increments too small to measure, the churning waters began to settle. The seeker floated in the darkness, no longer fighting it, no longer afraid of it, and the darkness began to feel less like drowning and more like rest, like the dark of the womb, like the dark of the earth where seeds sleep through winter, like the dark behind closed eyes when sleep finally comes after a long and difficult day. The fire still burned, but it no longer felt cruel. It felt like the warmth of a hearth in winter, like the heat of summer soil where things grow in secret, like the fever that burns away infection to leave the body clean. The seeker breathed, just breathed, in and out, with no thought of spirit rising or soul descending, no attempt to control or direct the tide. Just the simple animal fact of breath moving through a body that was both vessel and sea, both fire and water, both the work and the worker. Let the sea be as it is, the seeker thought, or perhaps the sea thought through them. Let the darkness be dark. Let the fire burn. Let everything be exactly what it is, without my interference, without my fear, without my need for it to be anything other than this. And in that allowing, that acceptance, that profound and simple letting be, something began to change. At first, the seeker thought they were imagining it, a faint shimmer in the depths, so subtle it might have been a trick of their exhausted mind. But no, there it was again, a flicker of light in the blackness, like a star being born, like the first pale hint of dawn at the edge of a long night. The black water began to clear, not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, gently, the way morning comes. By such small degrees that you cannot point to the moment when night ends and day begins, only that darkness was, and now there is light. The seeker did not grasp for it, did not try to hurry it along. They simply floated in the darkness, becoming light, breathing, allowing, witnessing without attachment to what came next. The water cleared, and deep in the depths, something moved. The seeker's breath caught. Their heart, which had been beating slow and steady in the rhythm of surrender, suddenly quickened. There in the water that was no longer quite so black, something was stirring. A pulse, a shimmer, a presence. The fishes were returning, but they were different now, changed. The seeker could feel it even before they could see them clearly. Something in the quality of their movement, in the light they cast, in the way they moved through the water. The storm had transformed them. The darkness had been their chrysalis. And now in the stillness after the storm, in the clear water that had been black and was now beginning to shimmer again with that strange inner light, the two fishes emerged, and they were swimming together. 5. The whitening albedo. They emerged from the depths like a memory returning, like a word long forgotten, suddenly spoken aloud. The seeker watched, barely breathing, as the two fishes spiraled upward through water that had become luminous, translucent, alive with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Spirit appeared first, but changed. The frantic quicksilver energy had softened into something more graceful, more fluid. The fish still shone bright, still moved with that characteristic upward impulse, but there was a new quality to its motion, a patience, a willingness to curve and spiral rather than simply shoot straight toward the sky. Its light was no longer harsh and electric, but warm, golden, like sunlight filtered through honey. And then soul rose to meet it, also transformed. The lunar glow had brightened, become more radiant while still retaining its depth. Soul still moved with that characteristic downward pull, that gravitational intimacy with the deep. But now there was lift in it too, a buoyancy, as if it had learned that descent and ascent were not opposites, but phases of the same eternal spiral. They swam toward each other, and the seeker's heart stuttered in their chest, half expecting the old collision, the old argument, the war between up and down, light and dark, transcendence and embodiment. But it did not come. Instead, the two fishes met in the middle of the water, in the middle of the seeker's being, and began to spiral around each other in a movement so beautiful, so perfectly synchronized, that the seeker felt tears spring to their eyes. They moved like two dancers who had finally remembered the choreography they had always known, like two streams of water braiding together, like the double helix of DNA, like the caduceus with its twin serpents, like smoke rising from two incense sticks and weaving into a single column of fragrance. Spirit rose and soul descended to meet it. Soul descended and spirit rose to meet it. And in the meeting, in the constant exchange between them, they traced a pattern in the water that was neither up nor down, but both and neither. A third thing entirely, a movement that transcended the binary logic that had once seemed so absolute. The seeker watched, transfixed, as the pattern repeated, spiral and return, rise and fall, expansion and contraction, and slowly, like a puzzle piece clicking into place, like a door opening in a wall you didn't know was there, the understanding came. They are not two beings. They have never been two beings. The fishes were one movement, seen from two angles. One breath, expressing itself as inhale and exhale. One tide manifesting as ebb and flow. One life force, dancing the eternal dance of polarities that needed each other to exist. Spirit could only rise because soul gave it something to rise from. Soul could only descend because spirit gave it something to descend toward. They were not opponents but partners, not enemies but lovers, not two separate things trying to become one but one thing that had always expressed itself as two in order to move, to grow, to transform. The fishes share one heart. Now finally the seeker understood what those words meant. They did not share a heart the way two people might share a house, each with their own room, their own territory. They shared a heart the way a heart shares itself with every beat, the systole and diastole, the contraction and expansion, the rhythmic pulse that is neither one nor two, but the living paradox of both. The seeker felt it in their own chest, the heart that had always been beating this double rhythm, this eternal dialogue between opposites that was not opposition, but collaboration. The heart that pumped blood up to the brain, spirit, and down to the belly, soul, in an endless circulation that was the very definition of life. How did I not see this before? But even as the question formed, the seeker knew the answer. They had not been ready to see it. The seeing required the darkness first, the dissolution, the surrender. It required the death of the old way of thinking, the binary logic that said you had to choose, had to be one thing or another. Spirit or soul, transcendence or embodiment, light or dark. The darkness had burned that logic away, and in its absence the truth could finally be seen. The two fishes continued their spiral dance, and as the seeker watched, another realization arrived, this one even more profound than the first. The sea was never mine to control. All this time, all those years standing at the shore, trying to manage the tides, trying to predict and direct the currents, the seeker had believed they were the master of the inner sea. They had thought it was something that belonged to them, something they possessed and therefore had to control. But now in this moment of crystalline clarity, they saw the truth. They did not contain the sea. The sea contained them. The sea had always been whole. The sea had always been breathing them into being. The fishes were not swimming in their sea. The seeker was swimming in the fish's dream, in the sea's great imagination, in the vast. Consciousness that dreamed all things into existence and held all things in its depths. The seeker was not the alchemist standing apart from the work, manipulating the elements. The seeker was the work, was the vessel and the fire, and the water and the fishes and the transformation all at once. There had never been any separation. That was the great illusion, the primordial forgetting from which all suffering flowed. I am not separate from what I seek to transform. I am the transformation itself. The understanding moved through the seeker's body like lightning, like grace, like the sudden recognition of a face you have always known, but could never quite remember. The inner sea expanded. It happened in an instant and over eons, in the way that true transformation always happens. Outside of time, in the eternal now that contains all moments at once. The boundaries of the sea, which the seeker had always felt as the limits of their own being, suddenly dissolved. Or perhaps they had never been there at all, and the seeker was only now seeing clearly for the first time. The sea was vast, limitless. It stretched to every horizon and beyond, connecting to every other sea, every other consciousness, every other being that had ever existed or would ever exist. The seeker was not a separate drop in the ocean, but a wave in which the whole ocean expressed itself, unique and unrepeatable, yet utterly inseparable from the whole. They were not alone. They had never been alone. That, too, had been part of the great forgetting. The water, which had been black and was now clear, which had been heavy and was now light, sparkled with an inner radiance that the seeker recognized as the same light that had been dimly glowing all along, hidden beneath the silt and shadow. It was the light of consciousness itself, the light of the life force, the light that all the mystics and sages had tried to describe and ultimately failed because it could only be experienced, never adequately explained. And in this light, reflected on the surface of the now vast sea, the seeker saw their own face. But it was not the face they remembered, or perhaps it was the face they had always had, but had never been able to truly see. It was at once familiar and strange, young and ancient, masculine and feminine, and neither human and divine and everything in between. It was their true face, their original face, the face they had worn before the world taught them who they should be. And as they gazed at this reflection, which was and was not their own, which was the sea gazing at itself, consciousness beholding consciousness, they heard it, their name. And not the name they had forgotten in the sea of forgetting, not the name the world had given them, or the name they had tried to make for themselves through achievement or spiritual practice, or any other striving. Their true name, the name the sea had been calling them all along in every wave, every tide, every movement of the fishes in the depths. They heard it, and in hearing it, remembered it, and in remembering it, became it. The seeker wept, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of recognition, of homecoming, of the overwhelming relief that comes when you finally arrive at a place you have been seeking your entire life and discover you were already there, had always been there, had never actually left. The two fishes continued their eternal spiral, and now the seeker could see that their dance was weaving something, not something new, but something that had always existed, that they were now able to perceive for the first time. They were weaving the pattern of wholeness, the pattern that held all opposites in balance without collapsing them into sameness, the pattern that allowed for differentiation without separation, for unity without uniformity, spirit and soul distinct yet unified, rising and falling yet moving as one, the eternal breath of existence itself. The seeker breathed with them, and the breathing was effortless now, natural, the way breathing is supposed to be, before fear makes it shallow, before thought makes it strained. Breath moved through them like wind through a reed, like water through a riverbed, meeting no resistance because there was no longer anyone trying to control it. In, out, rise, fall, expansion, contraction, the eternal tide. The body began to soften in ways the seeker had not known it was holding tension. The shoulders dropped, the jaw unclenched. The belly, which had been held tight with the chronic anxiety of someone always braced for impact, finally released. Warmth spread from the heart. That heart the fishes shared. That heart the seeker was finally learning to trust. Outward through the chest, down the arms to the fingertips, up the throat to the crown of the head. The warmth was not the cruel heat of the fire that had burned through the darkness, but something gentler. The warmth of blood moving freely through open vessels. The warmth of life itself when it is no longer obstructed by fear. The spine straightened, but not through effort. It straightened the way a plant straightens toward light, drawn upward by something natural, something innate. The seeker felt as if invisible tides were lifting them from within, as if the sea itself were breathing them upright, aligning them with some fundamental axis of being they had always been meant to stand on. And still the fishes danced. The seeker understood finally that this was not a destination but a revelation. The work was not complete, perhaps would never be complete in the way they had once imagined completion, but something essential had shifted. Some fundamental seeing had occurred that could not be unseen. They had witnessed the unity beneath the apparent duality. They had seen the one heart beating in two chambers. They had remembered their name. And in that remembering, everything changed. The sea within was no longer something to be managed or mastered. It was something to be trusted, to be lived from, to be allowed to breathe through them and move through them and express itself through the vessel of their life. Spirit and soul were no longer warring impulses to be reconciled through effort and discipline. They were the natural rhythm of existence, the systolic and diastolic pulse of consciousness itself, and all the seeker had to do was stop interfering and let them dance. The inner sea stretched vast and clear now, luminous with its own light, and the seeker floated in it with a peace they had never known. Not the peace of having arrived somewhere, but the peace of finally understanding there was nowhere else to go. They were already here, had always been here, would always be here, in this eternal now, where the fishes swam their spiral dance and the sea held everything in its depths. The seeker closed their eyes and breathed, and felt for the first time fully alive. 6. The reddening rubedo. The return to the outer world was gradual, gentle, like waking from a dream so vivid that for several moments you cannot tell which realm is real, the dream or the waking, except that the seeker was not waking from the dream. They were waking into it, or perhaps waking to the understanding that there had never been two separate worlds at all. The inner sea and the outer life were not divided by any boundary except the one they had imagined into being. The sea breathed, and the seeker's life moved with it. At first the changes were so subtle, they might have been missed by someone who was not paying attention. But the seeker was paying attention now in a way they never had before. Not the harsh, effortful attention of someone watching for danger or trying to optimize every moment, but the soft, receptive attention of someone who has learned to listen. They woke one morning to find that the familiar weight in their chest had transformed. It was still there. The sea would always be there, was the very fact of their aliveness, but it no longer pressed with that old heaviness, that chronic anxiety that had been their constant companion for as long as they could remember. Instead, it felt full, not heavy but substantial, not burdened but nourished. When they rose and dressed and moved through the small rituals of morning, there was a fluidity to their movements that had not been there before. The body knew how to move when consciousness was not constantly second-guessing it, when spirit and soul were dancing together rather than pulling in opposite directions. The seeker prepared tea. In the act of preparing tea, something they had done 10,000 times before, became suddenly luminous with presence. The weight of the kettle in their hand, the sound of water beginning to simmer, the fragrance of herbs releasing into steam. These were not interruptions to some more important spiritual state. They were the spiritual state, the sacred made manifest in the ordinary, the eternal expressing itself through the simple fact of a body moving through a kitchen in morning light. This is it, the seeker thought, or perhaps the sea thought through them. This has always been it. In the days that followed, the transformation ripened. The seeker went to the marketplace, as they had done countless times before, but now when the bread seller called out her greeting, the seeker heard not just words but the warmth behind them, the simple human reaching toward that happens in even the most mundane exchanges. They smiled back, and the smile came from somewhere deep and unguarded, and the bread seller's face lit up in response. "You seem different," she said, studying the seeker with curious eyes. "Lighter somehow. Have you been traveling?" Yes, the seeker thought. I have been traveling through an inner sea, through darkness and dissolution, through the death of who I thought I was. I have been to places that have no names and seen things that cannot be spoken. But what they said was simply, I've been learning to let go. The bread seller nodded as if this made perfect sense, as if everyone knew what it meant to let go. And perhaps they did. Perhaps everyone carried their own inner sea, their own two fishes, their own journey from forgetting to remembering. The seeker had never thought to ask before. They carried their bread home, and the weight of it felt like a prayer. The transformation deepened in the realm of relationship, where it always must if it is real. There was a friend the seeker had been avoiding for months, someone who had reached out repeatedly, wanting to talk about some hurt that had opened between them. The old seeker would have continued avoiding, caught between spirit's impulse to transcend the messiness of human conflict and soul's fear of being truly seen and possibly rejected. But the new seeker, or perhaps not new at all, perhaps the seeker who had always been waiting beneath the forgetting, found themselves walking to the friend's door. The conversation was not easy. There were tears, difficult truths, the kind of vulnerability that makes the body want to flee. But the seeker stayed. They felt spirit's impulse to rise above it, to philosophize or defend or explain their way out of the discomfort. They felt soul's impulse to sink into shame, to absorb all the blame, to collapse under the weight of having caused harm. But they did neither. Instead, they simply breathed. Let the two fishes swim their spiral dance. Let spirit and soul inform each other. The clarity of truth-telling and the tenderness of feeling with. The ability to see clearly and the willingness to be moved. The strength to hold boundaries and the softness to remain open. The conversation ended with an embrace that felt like the mending of something that had been torn in the fabric of the world. Walking home afterward, the seeker noticed that their chest felt both more spacious and more full, as if some chronic constriction had finally released. The healing rippled outward in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. The seeker had always struggled with their creative work, starting projects with great enthusiasm, spirit's ascending fire, only to abandon them when the initial excitement faded, or getting mired in perfectionism and self-doubt, soul's descending weight, and never beginning at all. But now, seated at their desk with paper and pen, they found a new way of working. They felt spirit's impulse to reach, to vision, to imagine what did not yet exist. And instead of dismissing soul's slower, more embodied knowing, they let both inform the work. The ideas came, spirit rising, and were tested against felt sense, soul grounding. The vision soared, spirit, and was given form through patient, loving attention to craft, soul. The work flowed. Not effortlessly, there was still effort, still frustration, still the very human struggle of trying to bring something invisible into visible form. But it flowed the way water flows around stones, finding its way without force, moving because it must, because that is what water does. And the work was good, better than good. It carried something the seeker's previous work had lacked, a wholeness, an integration, a sense that it came from someone who was no longer divided against themselves. Creativity, the seeker realized, was what happened when the two fishes swam in harmony. It was the child born from the marriage of spirit and soul, vision and embodiment, inspiration and perspiration. It could not exist without both. The peace that had arrived in the inner sea began to settle into the bones like warm stone, like the weight of a cat sleeping in your lap, like the heaviness that comes after good work, good food, good love, the satisfied heaviness of a life fully lived. The seeker's body itself felt different, more tender somehow, more alive. They noticed the pulse in their wrists, the way breath moved through the belly, the subtle electricity that ran along the skin when they touched the rough bark of a tree or plunged their hands into cool water or felt sunlight on their face. The body was no longer a prison to transcend, spirit's old lie, or a shameful thing to hide, soul's old wound. It was the vessel through which the sea expressed itself, the instrument through which spirit and soul played their eternal duet. It was holy, not despite its limits and hungers and inevitable mortality, but because of them. This flesh is the philosopher's stone, the seeker thought, running a hand along their own forearm, feeling the map of veins beneath the skin. the blood that carried both fire and water through the small cosmos of the body. This, life is the great work. There is nothing to achieve but this, to be fully alive, fully present, fully given to the truth of this moment. People began to notice. "You seem so present these days," someone said at a gathering. "So, here, it's like you're actually listening when we talk, not just waiting for your turn to speak." The seeker smiled because it was true. They were listening now in a way they never had before, with both spirit's clarity and soul's empathy, with both the discernment that could hear what was being said and the compassion that could feel what was being felt beneath the words. "What's your secret?" another person asked, half joking but also genuinely curious. "You look like someone who's figured something out. Did you go on a retreat? Start meditating? Find some new practice?" The seeker considered how to answer. How could they explain the inner sea, the two fishes, the darkness and the dissolution and the slow return to light? How could they speak of a journey that had taken place entirely within, yet had changed everything without? They couldn't. Not really. Some things cannot be taught but only discovered. Some truths cannot be handed over but only lived into. So they simply smiled. A smile that held both spirit's brightness and soul's depth, both the joy of having remembered and the sadness of having forgotten for so long, and said, "I learned to let the sea teach me its tide." The questioner looked puzzled, waiting for more. But the seeker offered nothing else, and after a moment, the conversation moved on to other things. It was enough, more than enough. Walking home that evening, the seeker felt the inner sea moving with each step, felt the two fishes swimming their eternal spiral, felt the rhythm of breath and heartbeat and the countless other rhythms that move through them, circadian and seasonal and cellular and cosmic, all of them part of the one great tide. The sky above was deepening into twilight, that liminal time when day and night dance together, when the boundary between light and dark becomes permeable and the world is suspended in the beauty of transition. The seeker stopped walking and simply stood there, feeling it all, the sea within and the sky above and the earth beneath their feet. The separation between inner and outer had become so thin, so transparent, that in moments like this it disappeared entirely. "I am the sea," they thought. "I am the sky. I am the breath that moves between them. I am spirit rising and soul descending, and the eternal point of balance where they meet. I am the two fishes, and I am the one heart they share. I am the vessel and the fire and the water and the work. I am already whole. I have always been whole. I was only ever looking for what I already was." The understanding brought neither elation nor pride, neither spiritual accomplishment nor self-satisfaction. It brought only a deep, quiet settledness, the feeling of finally being at home in one's own life, in one's own skin, in one's own moment-by-moment existence. The seeker walked on, carrying no doctrine, no method, no teaching to proclaim. They carried only presence, only this radical ordinariness, only the quiet radiance of someone who had died to who they thought they should be and been reborn as simply who they were. The two fishes swam on in the inner sea, and the sea was vast and clear, and the seeker breathed with the tide, and life continued its ancient, ever-new unfolding. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 7. Closing image. The seeker stands at the shore each morning now, not at the outer shore of some literal sea, though sometimes they walk there too, letting salt wind tangle their hair and cold water lap at their feet. But always, always they return to the inner shore, that permeable boundary between the vast sea within and the equally vast world without. And they stand there in the pearl gray light of dawn and simply watch. The two fishes are there, as they have always been, as they always will be. Some mornings they are easy to see, spirit flashing silver bright near the surface, catching the first rays of light, soul glowing deep below, steady as a lantern in the depths. The seeker watches them spiral and play, rise and fall, their movements tracing the ancient pattern that has no beginning and no end. Other mornings, the fishes are harder to discern. The light is strange, or the water is stirred by some passing storm of emotion or circumstance, or the seeker is tired and cannot quite focus. On these mornings, they might see only one fish, or think they see two, only to realize they were looking at a single fish from different angles, or become confused about which is spirit and which is soul, or whether such distinctions have ever mattered at all. On the very best mornings, or perhaps the most honest ones, the seeker cannot tell where the fishes end and the waves begin, cannot tell if they are watching two separate beings, or one fish seen twice, or simply the play of light on water, or the sea's own dreaming made briefly visible. They have stopped trying to count. This morning, this particular morning that is all mornings, this eternal now that contains every dawn that has ever been or will ever be, the seeker stands at the inner shore and watches the sun rise over the water. The fishes leap. They arc through the air in perfect synchrony, their bodies catching the light, and for just a moment the seeker sees them clearly. Two distinct forms, separate and beautiful and utterly themselves. Then they dive back into the sea, and the water closes over them, and in the ripples left behind the seeker cannot tell if there were two or one or many or none. It doesn't matter. What matters is the watching, the presence, the soft attention that expects nothing and receives everything. The willingness to stand here, morning after morning, and witness the eternal play of opposites dancing into union, of union expressing itself as opposites, of the one becoming two becoming one in the endless spiral of existence. The seeker takes a breath, deep, full, effortless, and feels it move through them. Spirit rising with the inhale, soul descending with the exhale, the tide that breathes all things into being and breathes them back into mystery. There are two fishes in every heart, the old voice whispers, the one that might be wind or teacher, or the sea itself speaking its truth. When they swim apart, life is a storm. When they swim as one, the sea becomes the sky. The seeker smiles because, yes, that is true, but also because there is more. There is always more. Layer upon layer of truth that reveals itself only when you stop grasping for it. The fishes swimming apart is not a problem to be solved. It is part of the dance. The storm is not a failure. It is part of the process. Even the forgetting is necessary. How else would there be remembering? How else would the gift be recognized as gift? And the sea becoming the sky, the seeker looks up, looks down, sees the same light in both directions, the same vast openness, the same limitless depth. The sea has always been the sky. They were never separate. Another breath, another wave, another moment of standing here at the threshold between inner and outer, between past and future, between who they were and who they are becoming, which is also who they have always been. The work is not finished. The work is never finished, because life itself is the great work, and life continues its unfolding until the final breath dissolves into the final tide. But something has been completed. Some essential circuit has been closed. Some fundamental remembering has occurred that cannot be forgotten again. Not entirely. Not even in the darkest nights that will surely come. The seeker knows now what they could not have known before. That wholeness is not a destination but a practice. Not an achievement but a returning. Not something to be grasped but something to be allowed. They know that the two fishes will sometimes swim in harmony and sometimes clash in storm. That the water will sometimes be clear and sometimes turn black. That there will be days of radiance and days of dissolution, days when everything makes sense and days when nothing does. And all of it is the work. All of it is holy. All of it is the sea teaching its tide to those who have the patience and humility to learn. The sun has fully risen now. The world is waking. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls. Somewhere closer, a door opens and closes. Somewhere inside the seeker's own body, a heart beats its double rhythm, systole and diastole, spirit and soul, the two chambers that share one pulse. The seeker turns from the inner shore and walks back into their life. They carry nothing but themselves, this body, this breath, this moment. They carry no secret teaching, no map for others to follow, no doctrine to proclaim. They carry only the quiet knowing that comes from having made the journey, from having descended into darkness and emerged into light, from having died to illusion and been born into truth. And if someone asks, if someone sees that quiet radiance and wants to know its source, the seeker will smile and perhaps say nothing at all, because some things cannot be spoken. Or perhaps they will offer the only words that matter. Go to your inner sea. Find your two fishes. Learn to let them swim. The rest each seeker must discover for themselves. The two fishes swim in the inner sea. Sometimes they are gold and silver. Sometimes they are light and shadow. Sometimes they are thought and feeling, doing and being, reaching and resting, speaking in silence. Sometimes they are simply the twin currents of a single life, flowing in opposite directions, yet moving always toward the same destination, which is no destination at all, but only this: the eternal present, the holy ordinary, the radical simplicity of being alive and awake and aware of the great mystery that breathes through all things. The sea holds them both. The sea holds everything. And we, all of us, whether we know it or not, are swimming in that sea, are made of that sea, are the sea dreaming itself into infinite forms and calling itself by infinite names. Two fishes in every heart, one heart in every sea, one sea in every breath. When they swim apart, life is a storm. When they swim as one, the sea becomes the sky. May you know your fishes. May you trust your sea. May you remember your name. The end. To the invisible teacher within, to the elder self that guides from the future, to the sea that holds all things in its depths, to the two fishes that swim the spiral dance, and to every seeker who has ever stood at the inner shore, watching the sun rise over the waters of their own becoming. May the work continue. May the dance go on. May we all remember what we have always known. Blessed be the journey. Blessed be the arriving. Blessed be the eternal return.